Welcome to the Politics People. My guests today are the hosts of one of the biggest and most influential political shows in the world, the juggernaut that is Triggernometry. I'm talking to Francis Foster and Konstantin Kisin. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for asking us, Paul. How are you doing, mate?
Seriously, it's so lovely to see your little faces. I'd say I've been waiting for this for ages. So, I was just saying, Triggernometry is massive now. Literally, how did it start? How did you two come together to do this?
Well, Paul, we both sat in a pub upstairs and we thought, how can we piss as many people off as possible? And then it started. No, it didn't. What it was
I mean, that was part of it, let's be honest.
It's always part of it. What it was two uneducated comedians trying to work.
For yourself. Jesus Christ. I actually studied economics and politics.
Did you complete your degree?
No.
Again, exactly.
Like all legends, I quit halfway through and started my own business.
Yeah. But essentially, it was two people who were uneducated and trying to figure out what the hell was going on in politics, but more specifically to do with Brexit. Because when Brexit happened, as we all know, it was a massive shock. And we were given, or rather we were fed the narrative that it was because of stupid, thick, racist white people voting against their own self-interests. And we knew that that wasn't the case. We knew many people who'd voted Brexit who were thoroughly intelligent, decent people. And we were just trying to find out what was actually happening. And from there, we then branched out into various different and other fields and, looking at it. And it's gone from there.
I would probably add to that as well, Paul, that, when we started, it wasn't, Francis, and he's right to say we were coming from a place of relative ignorance, but I also think we were starting to notice a few things in the water. There was something going on. We found in the comedy world, suddenly, it felt like very quickly we'd gone from a situation where, you could joke about almost anything, almost to a fault. There were people who were making jokes that even I was like, well, I'm not sure that, I want to be listening to that. We went from that to very quickly finding ourselves in a position where you had to be careful what you said. And suddenly there would be a sharp intake of breath if you acknowledged on stage that there is a difference between men and women. Or what some of these subjects that used to be the staple of comedy, suddenly they became very edgy. And you had to be careful. And suddenly you saw people, you'd be standing backstage listening to other comics, and suddenly it was all about, as a straight white man this, or as a black woman that. And it became very, very racialized, very, very hyper-focused on sex and gender and all of these identity groups. And that was a transformation that went almost unnoticed, but actually is a huge change. We didn't used to think of ourselves, I think, as these members of groups. And to give you an example, it was actually something I was discussing with my wife the other day. We've been having meetings about doing various shows and stuff like that, and it's amazing what comedy commissioners now think about. They don't even think about who you are. They literally go, well, you are two men. And to me, that is such a reductive way of thinking, and we were already starting to notice that this was happening. So while Francis is right, I think that we were coming from a place of not really knowing what's going on, and of course Brexit and then Trump were big formative events. We were already suspicious that something was going on under the surface, and that's what we wanted to understand. What is going on? Why is culture and politics heading in this very specific direction that, frankly, was starting to trouble us?
And it was also, as well, as two people, who identified as being on the left at that point, and two people who also would have identified themselves as liberals. Quite frankly, seeing some of people who you regarded as people who, shared your similar, political views, all of a sudden go absolutely tonto. And you started to see the words white older man being used as an epithet. And as a way, to describe Donald Trump, as though the reason he behaved in this manner was because he was an old white man. And it just seemed to me at that point that was when wokeism, liberalism, drank the Kool-Aid and started to go absolutely insane. And actually, looking back, it was, compared to what it is now, it was relatively sane.
My interest in you started with the fact that you, and we sort of touched on it, that you come from the UK comedy world, the UK stand-up world. You were just saying that in passing, but for me, that's a huge deal. That there are lots of people doing online punditry and online interview show. I mean, idiots like me, etc., doing podcasts and things. But you didn't do it from a neutral position. You were in the belly of the beast, or at least you were in the industry, the stand-up comedy world. That's where I'd come from originally as an agent, etc. So I know the sort of the licks and the stepladder that you were trying to climb to promote yourselves as comedians. But you took, even at that time when it was relatively tame, you took what you must have known was a killer for the kind of career that you might have originally been sold or been expecting. Does that make sense?
So
I'll give one quote and then you do a long speech about it. But my favorite quote when it comes to this issue is a quote from Fight Club, which is, "It's only once you've lost everything that you're free to do anything." And I think for both Francis and I, some of those identity things that I referred to meant that it didn't, the way we live in, the world we live in now, frankly, in comedy, in the mainstream of comedy, it doesn't matter how good you are anymore. That's not what it's about. It doesn't matter how funny you are. That's not what it's about anymore. Not really. Not really. Of course, every now and again, somebody will break through, but mostly it's not about that. And I think we knew that.
We did know that, but also as well, when Konstantin asked me to do this podcast, and he said to me, "Look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get people calling you a fascist. You're going to have people calling you a Nazi. You're going to have people making up lies about you. You're going to have friends turning their back on you." And I looked at him as if he'd actually lost his tiny little mind. I really had no idea of the depths of some people's feelings, and also as well the vitriol that we were going to be exposed to when we started out on this journey. I thought, look, you talk to everybody. That's what the BBC do. That's what Good Morning Britain do. They will have somebody on like Andrew Adonis, Arch Remainer, like we had on. We've also, our latest episode is with Nigel Farage. That's the whole point of a politics podcast, is that you try and talk to everyone. And the idea that somehow you interview someone and then all of a sudden you automatically agree with every single thing that they have done and they have said is, to me, quite frankly, ridiculous. But actually, the more and more I've experienced it, I'm starting to think it's a commonly held view.
And also, I think, Paul, we were coming to a point in both of our careers. Francis was doing very well on the comedy circuit, but he was very clear that he was never going to get beyond that. And I don't think I'm talking out of turn when I say that.
You are, fuck you. Stardom was waiting.
I can't believe a comic said that about another comic. That's terrible.
But it was true. He was in a dead end, and Francis would regularly find himself in a position where he would be the best performing act on a bill, and there would be an agent at the back of the room, a powerful agent in the back of a room, who'd come up to him after the gig and be like, "You crushed that, you were the best person on that bill." And Francis would reach out to them and go, "Well, how about you sign me up and start pushing me?" And they'd be like, "There's nothing we can do with you." And the truth is, you can't even blame the agents, because they weren't lying. There is nothing they could do with him. There's nothing they could do, because if you want to progress your career to television or whatever, let's be honest, Francis isn't what they're looking for.
Do you think that there are others who are at the same sort of stage of career, the way you've just described Francis's career, but that haven't made the move that you've made, that are still clinging on, if you like, in some kind of hope? Are there comedians that are still drinking the Kool-Aid, if you like, and pursuing, hopefully, hope against hope that they'll still get noticed one day, but on the side are telling you that they wish they'd made the move that you did?
Oh, all the time. All the time.
Really?
I get people going to me going, "Oh, I wish I'd done what you'd done, but I wouldn't be able to face that kind of flack." Or they come and they're having a chat with me about, a certain episode. I think a lot of people have realised that the game is rigged, but also that the game has fundamentally changed, and that comedy in itself, and particularly the television industry, isn't what it used to be. And actually, if you want to do something now, you have all the tools to do it.
Yeah.
You've got online. You have got access to a whole audience of people, many of whom are very, very disillusioned, many of whom feel that comedy is no longer funny, that it no longer speaks to them. That actually what comedy has become is not a way to make people laugh, and for most of it, to get people to forget their troubles from life. What it has now descended into is a tedious lecture, which after a 3-minute whinge, you then have a little clap because you agree with what that person has said.
What you're part of, I think, reminds me of what it was like to be in comedy in the early 90s. It's more like that now, I think, in the world that you're in. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I do feel that way. It's something we talk a lot about. When after a long day we sit and reflect and chat about stuff. I think about all the periods in cultural innovation of some kind where some kind of breakthrough's been made, and you've gone from classical art to impressionist art, or you've gone from one type of comedy to another, you've gone from one type of music to another. All that is just a bunch of guys sitting around in a cafe or whatever that is, or now we sit around on the internet. We've got Comedy Unleashed here in the UK, which is a bit of a hub for something like that, a counter culture to the prevailing orthodoxy. And I do agree with you. I see us very much as part of that, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about it. I think the one thing that we are very fortunate to have, and I always am aware of this, and I try and get other people to understand, is 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, they'd be burning people like us at the stake. And now we have the internet. We can bypass all the gatekeepers. We can make our own stuff. And if it's crap, nobody will watch it. And if it's good, lots of people will watch it. That is a godsend to anyone who wants to challenge the orthodoxy that exists at the moment. And you live and die on your own merit. If you create stuff that's great, you will get recognition, and if you don't, you don't. That to me, that's the only thing that I think, the only problem I ever had with the comedy industry as a whole is you go into it thinking it's a meritocracy, and you find out it's not. That's frustrating.
What years did you get into the stand-up comedy industry?
So with me, I did my first gig in August 2009. Everyone always remembers their first gig. So it was the 1st of August 2009. I did it for a couple of years, but I was also a teacher at the same time. I couldn't really balance the two because teaching is so all-consuming. So I quit, and then I came back properly in 2013. But even when I came back in 2013, I realised that a lot of it had changed back from 2009.
Oh, interesting.
There was already talks of diversity, representation, which I must admit, I'm not in disagreement with. The more you have, if you have diverse voices, in many ways you can have a more interesting show. Because if you've got 4 people from the same background talking about the same thing, it's going to get repetitive. If you have somebody on who's very good but talks about what it's like, I don't know, to be like a first-generation immigrant, or somebody else talking about what it's like to be a divorced mother of 2, it makes a more interesting show. And then seeing that and go, oh, this is quite cool that they want more, the more diverse people, whatever else. And then slowly seeing it mutate until it became this dogma whereby, you could only have this amount of acts and who are white male, and this amount of people who are this type, and this amount of people who are that type. And also, and this is a very interesting thing as well, like when I started breaking through into the clubs, which was 2015, 2016, and doing the clubs regularly, seeing the way the audience has changed. Not the majority of audiences. The majority of audiences have always been the same. But there is an emboldened minority of people who feel that they can make complaints about the most innocuous things and are now far more emboldened about doing so. And talking to comedy club owners of very respected comedy clubs about this, they will say, and they will tell you that complaints have actually absolutely skyrocketed.
They have. And look, by the way, Paul, I don't want this to come off, and I'm very wary that it might have so far, as 2 comedians who never made it, whining about how no one wanted them and all this sort of thing. I don't.
You're saying it's just Francis. one of them is fine.
Yeah, it's just one comedian like that. Yeah. Neither of us really feels that way. You make your own luck in the world, and you make your own thing. And if the comedy industry is looking to address historic imbalances, and that's what they need to do, fine. What we've done is we've created our own thing. And, so all I'm talking about there, I'm not saying, oh, we never quite made it. Both Francis and I had great careers. I did my debut Edinburgh show, great reviews, sold out pretty much all my tickets. I was doing well in the clubs. So was Francis. He was making good money. It was all fine. It was fine. It's just that neither of us was interested in fine. We wanted to find a space where we could fully express ourselves. And
I'll go one step further. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's all been you up till now. No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you see, I don't think if you were from the left, you would make that kind of disclaimer. You've got Bill Maher, you had David Baddiel on the other day. You've got tons of comedians who might be more, and again, I consider you to be, your content is very, very neutral, actually. You do give everybody an even hand. But you take somebody like Bill Maher, whose entire career is being based on, we're told he's a stand-up, but he actually is the face of, the Democrat kind of media. You wouldn't have to make that kind of disclaimer, is my point. And that's what I find interesting. This is the kind of the nexus that you're at, is that you have not only, even Ben Shapiro, for instance, has only solely been a conservative commentator or writer. You guys understand the media as it stands anyway, and were, ploughing that furrow in the stand-up world, and as well as anybody else was doing. But apart from the content, you actually saw a media opportunity, a digital opportunity to be able to diversify. As I said, I don't want to tell you why you're brilliant, but it's as I said, I find that the culture around this early days of conservative broadcasting, for want of a better word, coming with those kind of disclaimers, it's just like, if you get legitimate fame off this that can translate back into ticket sales again after COVID, etc., well, then you'll just be stand-up comics selling tickets again off the back of this. That's how you will, that will be one of the diversifications you will make, like any other comic would do. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's interesting the language we have around all of these issues as well, because Francis and I talk about this all the time, because people including you just now, describe us as conservative commentators or whatever. And when neither of us is conservative, this is the funny thing to us, in the conventional sense. We have a lot of views that are very liberal in the traditional sense, right? Whether that's drugs or other freedoms that people have. We're probably in major disagreement with a lot of conservative thinking on those issues. And I think the reason that we have this, everything has become very binary, black and white. If you're not on the woke left, that means you're conservative. And it's actually not us that came up with this, but our producer. And I interrogated him about why he wanted to be involved with trigonometry, because when he came on board, and still now, he votes Labour at every election, says he'd never vote for the Conservatives.
Well, he says he does.
One of them.
To be
probably
fair.
votes UKIP, actually.
Yeah.
No, but seriously. and I said to him, so what is it about trigonometry that made you feel this passionately about it, that you've committed your whole, basically, life to it? And he said, well, what we're doing is we're holding the line. And sometimes we're to the right of the line, and sometimes we're to the left of the line, but we're holding the line in the middle. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're trying as best we possibly can to do. So we don't think of ourselves as a conservative show or a old school left wing show, which, Francis probably the best description for his political views is an old school lefty. We just try to hold that line in the middle between the insane lunatics on both sides.
And don't forget as well, although our politics, certain things have changed. I would argue, become more socially conservative in my values, and that might be because of the views I'm expected, but it's also might be an age thing as well. I think it's the fact that we haven't changed that much, but the world around us has. So you can have, which are pretty mainstream, middle of the road, left of centre, or maybe old school left opinions, and you look at it now and that means you're on the right because you disagree with certain things. It just seems that in a world that's become ever more binary, to be nuanced and to take and analyse each subject on its own merits suddenly means that you're a conservative. And can I just say as well, a lot of people will use that as a dirty word in the comedy industry. I see nothing wrong with being on the right. I see nothing wrong with being a conservative. They're just different points of view and different ways of looking at the world.
I was hopefully at pains to point out that the content you produce is actually really neutral. You don't... you don't actually take the sides that people with prejudice might assume. Because I believe were you both Remainers for the referendum.
Because we're good people, Paul.
Yeah, we're moral people. That's what it's all about. We both voted. We both voted Remain. I don't like the label Remainer because it brings with it all sorts of unpleasant associations about people.
This is like PTSD. Yeah, it's fine. I don't judge you because you're Remainers.
No. I know you don't. But Paul, what I mean is the label Remainer, mainly in my mind, applies to people who didn't respect the result of the referendum.
Right.
Who thought that it was all, evil Nigel Farage and the Russians who brainwashed the public into doing all of this. It was all about some bus or whatever that convinced people. The point I've tried to make for the last 5 years, unsuccessfully, is that it was perfectly possible to vote Remain and then go, well, we lost, therefore we must now implement Brexit, which was the position we both took. Right? We voted, we argued, we took that position. We were very disappointed to have lost it at the time. Now, our views have evolved over that time, but nonetheless, you have a democratic vote, you accept it. You accept the result and you move on. And that's why we were equally frustrated with some of the Trump favoring people after the American election, where it was all stolen, fake news, blah, 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 blah. You can't argue for 4 years that the election of the Brexit vote should be respected and then immediately go, well, when we lose, that's stolen. You have to have a level of consistency. And I come back to that point about holding the line.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to say that it would have been far easier for us to then go and, and to appeal to, a certain fan base and go, the election was stolen and whatever else. But we didn't. We actually came out and said, look, democracy needs to be respected. And we took a lot of shit from comedians for saying democracy needs to be respected with Brexit. And we took some shit as well from people who get very upset because we went, well, democracy needs to be respected in the US election.
No, I think that's one of the reasons why you have consistently managed to get bigger and bigger guests, because people are very nervous about this space, anybody with a mainstream career, because you get massive guests on. I mean, you said, I think this week it was Badil and Farage yesterday, wasn't it? And you do, and these people obviously are, and I don't want to be flippant about this, but even the qualifying of almost every sentence that we have to make, for me, denotes somewhat what the climate in London must be like for you. That every single disclaimer, and exactly as you're saying, Francis, it's the world that's changed. It's like, unless you are doctrinal about particular beliefs and espousing particular beliefs, you are now outside the tent.
Yeah. You are. That is completely what you are. You are outside the tent, and somehow, tribalism has just gone off the scale, partly as a result of social media, but it's also as well that somehow, like I said before, if you talk to somebody or you platform somebody who you may disagree with, it's somehow seen as betraying your tribe. And people will get very, very upset with you. Like, for instance, we interviewed Nigel Farage. The interview went out on Wednesday, or whenever it was, or yesterday. And I had a phone call from a very dear friend of mine, who I love dearly, furious that I, that I interviewed Nigel Farage. And he was saying, I can't believe you've done this and so, why have you done this? And it's like, well, we run the number one political show on YouTube for the UK. How can I not have Nigel Farage on, a man who was one of the most transformational and successful politicians of his era? How can I not have him on? That's ridiculous.
So these people weren't a close friend then? I mean, have they got no idea what you've been doing for the last 2 years?
Well, he is a close friend, but he believes that, I think that, that Farage is toxic and that there are limits to it would be his argument.
Well, I think the point that we're hitting on here, and this is really important because you keep picking up on the fact that we make lots of qualifiers. This is why, Paul, we live now in a world where people believe in what I call the 6 degrees of white supremacy, where if you talk to us and we talk to Nigel Farage and he talked to Steve Bannon and he talked to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump once walked next to someone walking their dog who's even worse than he, then you put all that together and that means you are now Hitler. That's the world we live in, right? And so whenever we talk, whenever we have these conversations, we are present to the fact that every single word in this podcast can be taken out of context, misrepresented, and we can be painted in a particular light. And people do this to us all the time. Give you the example that Francis just gave with Nigel Farage, right? We had Lord Andrew Adonis, arch Remainer, on the show over a year and a half ago, I think. He is the Remain's version of Nigel Farage. That's what he is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as people, I find them both pleasant, decent people. That's my experience of them.
Yeah.
I have no issue with Lord Adonis. I don't have any issue with Nigel Farage. But if you want to attack our show, what do? You go, who's the most controversial guest they've had on? They've had Nigel Farage on. That means they're evil, right? You don't look at the balance. But we don't get treated by the same standards as the mainstream media. Andrew Neil has interviewed people like Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, all of these other people that we haven't interviewed. But no one goes, well, Andrew Neil or Emily Maitlis or whoever it is agrees with Katie Hopkins, right? Or platforms Katie Hopkins. Very few people are saying that because it's understood that the point of political discussion shows is to engage with different points of view. We don't live in that world, and we don't get treated by the same standards. And if you have the wrong guest on, you start getting irate phone calls or whatever. That will never stop us from having the guests on, but it is a consideration that we have to be aware of.
And it is a consideration that you have to be aware of, but it's also infected the mainstream media. So, for example, you now see, like, when you see, like, Emily Maitlis being, interviewing a controversial guest, for example, it's almost like she has to perform and say, I disagree with this guest for X, Y, and Z reasons. That's why I'm going to come in with a really stern face and be like, ugh. And it's, number one, right?
I mean, when she was doing Prince Andrew, it was fair enough.
Yeah, it was. But so number one, it's ridiculous. It's performance. It's virtue signaling. And number two, it creates a really poor quality content. It just does, because the guest isn't at ease. They're going to clam up. They're not going to say anything. And what you get is an adversarial interview in which both parties come out worse and poorer. And it's not just both parties, it's the audience as well. Yeah. So when you come on, so when we get Nigel Farage on, you will actually see Nigel Farage more relaxed. We're still going to challenge him. We're still going to go, Nigel, what about this? What about that? But we're going to laugh if he makes a joke and it's funny, which he did several times in the interview. We're going to laugh along. And you're going to get a more authentic version of who Nigel Farage actually is. And then guess what? We're going to treat you like an adult. And you're going to make up your own mind. Maybe you like him, maybe you didn't, or maybe you think he's a human being with his own flaws and peccadillos and whatever else they may be.
And I would add as well that, one of the things, and it's obviously been exacerbated by lockdown and the pandemic, Paul, is that we live in a world that is 4-dimensional, but we think it's 2-dimensional. Right?
Yeah.
And every person that we think of, we have a caricature of them that in many cases has absolutely no relevance to who that person is as a person. And once you treat people as people, there are sides of them that come out that you can see and that you wouldn't normally see. So a lot of people, the frustration with certain guests comes from the fact that actually they don't want that 2-dimensional caricature broken. They prefer to think of that person as uniquely evil. They don't want to recognize that they're a human being. They don't want to recognize that whatever you think about someone like Farage or Andrew Adonis, they're human beings who have principles that they fought for at great personal cost. Both of them. Both of them have fought at great personal cost these battles because they believe what they believe. And they're bloody allowed to. They're allowed to have their opinions. And they're human beings with a multitude of character strengths and weaknesses and personality flaws and wherever it is. And they're a whole human being. And a lot of people, they don't want that. They don't want to see the humanity in other people. They want them to be a caricature so that you can point your finger and throw your dart at the dartboard with their face on it. That's what people want. And we're not interested in that. And I don't think that helps. And that's, when I think about trigonometry in my slightly messianic way, I do think that it's about humanizing the conversation. It's about showing people that these people that you're used to hating and having your opinions of, they're actually people. And, for me, that comes from my own experience because I had this incident a couple of years back where I turned down what the newspapers called a safe space contract for a comedy gig. And suddenly I went from not being particularly well known as a comedian to having every newspaper writing stories. And what I found was even the people who are on your side, quote unquote, they still don't represent you accurately, right? So I don't believe what newspapers or media say about anyone who I've not met in person yet. I make up my own mind about people now. Because once you've seen it from the inside, you've seen how the sausage is made, and you don't really want to go there anymore.
And it's also as well, the problem is with our society on many different levels is that we are putting simple solutions to incredibly complex problems. And this is how we look at all these people in 2D. Andrew Adonis said this at one point, therefore it means this. Nigel Farage said this, therefore he means that. He's a hateful, evil bigot. And Andrew Adonis is an arch Remainer. He doesn't respect democracy. And what you get is narratives. And the problem is with narratives is they have very little bearing or resemble reality in any shape or form. And once that happens, you're in a very, very dangerous place because you're not dealing with reality anymore. You're not dealing with nuance. You're not balanced. You're not actually trying to solve a problem. All you're simply trying to do is put your version, this narrative, onto reality. And the two don't fit. And we're trying to be an antidote to that.
You know, for my part, for what it's worth, I think I actually think things are simpler than people think. I think there's a lot of histrionics that are very attractive to people and become seductive in their own right. They become very simplistic. But I think pretty much people have wanted the same thing for the last 5,000 years, and people 5,000 miles away, everybody kind of wants the same thing. I think I'm very reductive on the whole thing, and I'm always, as a bystander, as an observer, just fascinated by how deliberately complicated things become and how then people insinuate themselves into power or to a situation by suggesting that things are more complicated than they are, if you like, you know. And I think that's why it's important, the kind of spaces that you provide where people can know that they're not going to be, you challenge people, but you don't hijack them, you know. There's no ambush. You know, people do know that they can freely express their opinion, which I think is pretty rare these days in a legitimate media platform. I'm sure there are neutral broadcasters out there, but they got 3 viewers. You're, you know, as I described you, you're a juggernaut. It's an extraordinary business now you've created. What do you? Sorry to go off on a tangent there. It was just well,
actually, Paul, really... you make an important point that maybe we should pick up on, because I think this is important and we haven't talked about it yet, which is media impartiality. What you get with us is we'll tell you what we think, right? We'll say, look, we voted this way. Now I think this. Here's my view of this issue. And here's the guest that is coming on. And we'll say to the guest, well, I agree with you on this and this and this, but here's the thing that we disagree with you about. Let's have that conversation. You know, the last 2 interviews you mentioned, David Baddiel and Nigel Farage, there are whole sections of those interviews where I, in particular, because I'm sort of bad cop mainly on the show, I go, well, you did this, you said this, you know, do you not regret that? Or you wrote this book, David Baddiel, and I think you're refusing to connect things. You're refusing to connect the dots on things that actually are connected. And we have that conversation. That exchange. But it comes from a place of me saying what I actually think, right? Yeah. Whereas in the media, what you get is a pretend conversation. As Francis was talking about, you know, obviously the Kathy Newman, Jordan Peterson interview is a good example of this, where someone is pretending to be neutral while actually being extremely partisan at the same time. At the same time. And it's dishonest, and people see through that. So one of the things that has allowed us to have the level of success, and you're very kind to say that we're a juggernaut, and we hope to grow way more than we already have. That's our aim.
By the way, we see that as fat shaming.
You know, we wanted to grow more, but one of the reasons I think we've had the success we've had so far is that the media, the mainstream media, have stopped doing what their job used to be. Yeah.
I mean, that's my point. What you're doing would not be out of place. Channel 4, early 90s, Sunday morning. That's where this show would have existed. So I was going to say is, like, are you optimistic that people have still a notion of wanting fair media, fair broadcasting, that they want their voices heard. Have they been subsumed now? Are they too frightened to speak out? Or do you sense that people actually have got a notion that they will stick up for people like you and, desire to have it back in the, on the BBC, etc., more neutral, fair-minded coverage of these events?
I think, to be honest with you, I think a lot of people deep down desire that, but I think that the overall atmosphere is so toxic at the moment, and you see that through people getting cancelled. You see that with artists, saying, "Oh, I really enjoyed this book," and then being forced to leave their band in a way that never happened before.
Oh yeah, Mumford and Son. What is that?
I mean,
cancel them because he plays a banjo, by all means, but not because of his book reading.
But you see, this is the problem, and I think, there's the optimist in me who's where, I know, a dying optimist, who's sees a redemptive quality in human beings and goes, we can move beyond this. We all love a story of redemption. Because deep down, we all need that story, because we all transgress, we all fail, we're all broken, we're all flawed. None of us is perfect. But the reality is, with social media, is that we've got to project this image of perfection. We have got to be holier than thou, because if we are not, then we ourselves are at risk of being cancelled, dogpiled, being removed, and having our careers destroyed. So this fear essentially keeps us all in check, and in many ways removes our humanity.
Oh, entirely. But now you are the masters of your own domain now. So you do actually have your own empire. Yeah. But are you still subject to controls? Have you had any kind of rap over the knuckles from like YouTube, etc.? Have you had videos moved or taken down?
Well,
how does that work out?
Yeah. So we are in a very fortunate position, and as I say, we've got a lot more growing to do, and. By all means, Francis, myself, our producer, and we have a couple of other people working for us now. So it's become a small business that we run. And it's not like we're wealthy or making loads of money from it at all. We just make enough to keep the business running, basically. That's where we are. So we've got a lot more growth to come, and we'll get bigger, and that's always going to be the ambition.
But you're a business and you employ people now, etc. I mean, you're basically making your livings off this and able to employ
absolutely.
people.
And so we are much more in control of our own destiny than most people. And this is something that's going to become more and more important going forward. If you want to speak your mind in public now, you better have an independent source of income. It doesn't matter where you're on the left, right, up, down, middle. Look at J.K. Rowling. On the left, her whole life, says one thing about the trans issue, boom, cancel J.K. Rowling. Now, they can't cancel J.K. Rowling, but if you're an ordinary person who makes the same statement, they will cancel you. They will get you fired. So that will become a bigger and bigger part of, I think, just, preventative measures that you put in place for your life. You're going to have an independent source of income. And we have had issues with YouTube. There are certain things that, particularly over the course of the pandemic, that they've changed the rules whereby a conversation you had 3 months ago suddenly is now against YouTube rules. And we had a video from somebody who was, very counter-narrative, let's say, on the COVID thing. Not some weird conspiracy theorist who was saying it's all made up and it's all whatever, but just someone who had, who thought that there were elements of it that were being exaggerated, there were unanswered questions, etc., etc. And that video was on 1 million views when it was deleted by YouTube because it suddenly now contravened rules. So it was retrospective action. It was like being prosecuted for a crime that wasn't a crime where you committed it. So we're by no means free of it entirely, but certainly a bit more free than most people, and we're very grateful for that.
We are very grateful for that, but as always, as well, we are in a precarious position. YouTube is, jury, justice, executioner, and if they find you guilty, the account can go like that. Yeah. So we realise how precarious it is, and the idea that that we can talk about anything completely free and untrammeled is sadly not true. There are certain things topics that when we talk about, we have to tread more carefully. We just do. And you do get people going, oh, why don't you just do it and solve the consequences? It's like, well, because I like food and a roof over my head.
But also, I mean, that's a very crude way of putting it. I don't even like that Francis has said that, to be honest, because it's not really about a roof over our head. It's more about the fact this thing employs 5 people now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to them as well, as to our own, yachts or whatever people think we own. You know what I mean? Like there's a thing that's just, so we have to unfortunately take that into consideration. I mean, look, the conversation about free speech online is a little bit more nuanced than what we're talking about right now, because, when you have a show with 250,000 subscribers, is there an element of responsibility on you not to be broadcasting wild conspiracy theories? I say yes, there is. I've never been a free speech absolutist. I think as a show, we think very carefully about who we invite on because of the style of the interview that we do. I made the comparison with Andrew Neil earlier, and I don't think actually it's a particularly fair comparison. Andrew Neil will interrogate a guest about their beliefs. We don't do that. So there is an element when we get someone on where we are giving them free rein a little bit, right? And so we wouldn't get, a Katie Hopkins on the show because we're not going to spend an hour going, well, here's an article you wrote that was absolutely disgusting 5 years ago. You know what I mean? So there is a bit of nuance that needs to be there too.
But that's an editorial decision rather than a free speech decision,
it
isn't
is.
it?
Exactly.
Yeah, so
even the First Amendment isn't an absolutist. There are qualifications within the First Amendment. So even that is, I think, of peaceable assembly, etc. And not being able to use language for violent disorder or something. I don't know.
Inciting
but
violence,
even the First Amendment isn't absolutist.
Yeah, so we, like Konstantin was saying, we do have a responsibility. We're also very aware of the fact that we are starting to affect the broader conversation. And that, again, brings with it its own responsibility. And we have our meetings that last for hours where we sit down. And one of the questions we actually ask is, what is this person contributing that is of value? What has this person said or done that has contributed something to the public discussion that will move it forward? And that's how we book our guests. There's some guests that we could get on that would get a huge amount of clicks and views and all the rest of it. But the reality is they bring nothing of value that we perceive.
And also there's certain topics, look at the thing that's blowing up the conversation right now. It's Harry and Meghan. There's other stuff like that. And look, I know that people care about it and it's great entertainment, but it's not something we're going to get involved in just because it's not, we try and take a bigger picture view of things and talk about the bigger trends, not the ins and outs of who married who and who cheated on who and all.
Who did cheat on who?
No, we'll find out, mate.
It's true. Well, I did a couple of radio shows because obviously I'm here in the States, and I did a couple of radio shows here and a couple of radio shows in the UK, and they just didn't want to hear that. Look, I just think it's a sideshow. There's less to it than meets the eye. It is a storm in a teacup. It is gonna. They can't. Again, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of media, isn't it? Because they're all talking about it, then it's important. It's like, I don't know, I don't know. Again, I don't think it's moved the needle at all.
No.
And that's why, the purpose of trigonometry is to look at the broad cultural and political shifts that are happening in society. What is happening in the Western world? Why are people now suddenly running around obsessed about the trans issue, right? Why is that happening? And is that just an isolated thing, or is that part of a bigger thing? And if it is part of a bigger thing, what is that thing? And where does it come from? And where is it taking us? Those are the interesting conversations. People will forget about who argued with whom or who asked whose baby was what color or whatever. They won't care about that 10 years from now. But some of the tectonic shifts that are happening in Western civilization, they will affect the world for centuries to come. They will literally for centuries to come.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're trying to address, and that's what we're trying to speak about. The minutiae of stuff that happened in the news is trivial and insignificant in our view, and we just try and stay away from it because, great entertainment, but not what we do.
No. And what we don't want to do is to be reactive and just go, oh, look, everybody's talking about this, therefore we'll be talking about this, because it's boring and it's tedious, and all you're really doing at that point is scratching the surface. What people, there's a very, very deep craving for, is an exploration of a particular subject over an hour, where people can come away and go, I've actually learned something. And it's also as well the fact that we don't lecture, that we don't, it's not didactic. What it is an issue presented in which people will speak about it, and then it's left up to you as the audience member, the listener, the viewer, whatever it may be, to make up their own mind.
And by the way, this is us talking about the ideal. We've made mistakes in the past. We've got people on. Yeah, we have. Okay. Yeah, you especially.
Yeah.
No, we've made mistakes in the past. There's certain people that we've had on the show and we think, was that the right decision? Did they really add anything to the conversation, or did they actually detract from it? And that will always happen. You have to take chances and explore stuff. But the ideals of trigonometry are what we've been talking about. That deeper, bigger conversation.
Yeah, you've got like an archive there, haven't you? I mean, it isn't led topically, even though it is topical, because you're capturing. I hate to say zeitgeist, but you are capturing the snapshot of world politics at the moment, the actual tectonic plates, if you like. But you can go back and watch an interview that you did a year ago, and it is a good in-depth analysis, not constantly interrupted by somebody saying, yes, but in 1975 didn't you wear a blue hat or something? You've actually really got you've actually got a proper archive there, I think, of current thinkers and movers and players. It's really interesting what you do. The only thing I was gonna, before I let you go back to your proper real lives, I think you touched on it earlier. Just the idea that you might attract people who you'd never give time of day to, but they sort of project their own views onto you and assume that you're somehow, I don't know, football hooligans or something, or Nazis. Or do you get that? Do you get a lot of people that that you have to kind of politely
Not
avoid?
a lot. We do get some, but it's a process of filtering out. That's how we've always thought about it. So let's say you get a Nigel Farage on. We've been using him as an example now because he's fresh in our memory. There will be people who follow Nigel Farage who have absolutely nothing in common with the values of trigonometry. They're not interested in open inquiry. They're not interested in a sensible centre. They're not interested in a reasonable conversation about the issues that Nigel Farage raised, like immigration. There will be some people who follow him who are, let's just call it what it is, who are outright racist. A small minority of people who are like that. And they will come to the show and they'll go, oh, this show interviewed Nigel Farage. This must be the show for me, right? And a week later, we'll interview David Baddiel or Andrew Adonis, and all those people will leave. And we look at that as a success story, right? We attracted a lot of people, a small minority of whom were not suitable for our show. And then next week, those people filtered themselves out of our audience. And over a period of years, you develop an audience that buys into what we do, right? And what we do is sensible, nuance, looking at both sides, and as our producer said, holding the line. And the people who buy into that, they'll be the people who are still fans of trigonometry 5-10 years from now. And the people who were here for a week, gone tomorrow, great, they've enjoyed an interview, good for them. They go on and do consume their content. And equally, there'll be people on the far left. They might see that we had a particular guest on that they really liked. They'll come along and then they'll go, oh, these people actually don't like all this woke shit. Not for me. Great, they've enjoyed an interview and off they go. And that's fine by us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also as well this realization that you're never truly going to please everybody.
Absolutely.
All you can do is adhere to your own values. And we will platform people from George Galloway to Nigel Farage to, we'd love to have Owen Jones on the show, because we believe that in order for society to improve, that we need open, honest conversations. That's the only way any of us are going to learn. It's the only way we're going to grow. It's the only way we're going to develop. And ultimately, and maybe it's a bit grandiose, it's the only way we're going to save Western society. Because if we carry on down the path that we're going, screaming at each other, hurling epithets, cancelling, we're going to end up in a very, very dark place that we don't want to be. And if if the crocodile hasn't eaten you, the reason is because it hasn't got to you yet. But you will be consumed just the same.
I think that's a somber note to let you go back to.
It's how I like to leave my comedy audience members, Paul.
Somber.
Somber, just quietly depressed.
Don't open with that one. Listen, thank you, Konstantin, Francis, Triggernometry. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been just an education and delight. Thank you.
Our pleasure, Paul.
Thank you very much.
All ours. Thank you so much for having us.
Cheers.